So once again, we're back with some more Bad Guys content, as just recently we saw the release of the Bad Guys Haunted Heist, which acts as a Halloween special for the franchise. Lovely. I always do love Halloween content from DreamWorks. The Spooky Shrek or whatever it was called, a true classic of the screen. But yes, we haven't talked about Bad Guys on this channel in ages. It's been quite a while. When I first caught wind of the franchise, I was honestly pretty hyped up about it. The first film they made, it was good overall. It was well animated, had a really cool and intriguing premise, with colourful and exciting characters with a gripping and humorous plot. This, combined with the bombastic action sequences and top-tier voice acting, created a film that was one of DreamWorks' best in years. It didn't end up doing as well as the studio probably would have liked financially, grossing about $250 million off around $80 million. And that's not taking into account all those secret expenses and advertising, but I still think it turned a profit, even if small compared to their big name franchises. And clearly the studio still sees some potential in this thing going forward into the future, because they have cranked out a Christmas special, there's a sequel in the works slated to release in August 2025, and now we have this Halloween special too. Coming into this thing, I think it's fair to say that I was less than excited. I had seen the Christmas special, The Bad Guys, A Very Bad Holiday, and it was rough. Very bad. Don't get me wrong, I do have some grace for these made-for-streaming DreamWorks specials and shows that they make. Almost always they're of a significantly lower quality than the stuff you're going to see hit the silver screen, and that's just a fact. A lot of that has to do with budgetary concerns, don't get me wrong, so it is hard to hate too much. Ultimately, the animation was pretty poor in the Christmas special. Not the worst I've seen from DreamWorks, but still not great. On top of that, the original voice cast did not return. And sadly, the voice cast is what often turns a trash script into treasure. But when you're on a budget, the first thing you're going to probably pass on is the top level actors. Sam Rockwell, Awkwafina, and that's just two of them. There were many great actors in the original film with iconic voices and ways of speaking that left the replacement scrambling to try to replicate it. But then you end up with this audio uncanny valley where the voices are sort of similar. You can also tell something slightly off too. It didn't sound very good. But in the end, that's all stuff that you can somewhat look beyond in time. When rational thought kicks in and you accept that yes, the budget is much lower, so it's not going to have the same visual quality. And having the top billed actors from the movie is unrealistic. Although on that train of thought, it never used to stop the Shrek franchise from being able to afford their top stars for their little specials. Although I guess you could then argue that Shrek is a far more lucrative property than the Bad Guys, and so you'd expect more of your return on investment in those big names than if you're making a Bad Guys Halloween special. Still sucks though. But beyond budgetary concerns, what I can never accept is a dogshit script. Bad creative, bad dialogue, stupid plot points. I don't mean silly or goofy plot points, that's all well and good, and you kind of expect it from this sort of thing. I simply mean bad, unfunny, boring. And A Very Bad Holiday was all that and much, much more. The thing only went for 25 minutes, and yet it felt like it went for 25 years. It was dull and slow, the jokes were bad, the delivery from the voices was poor, the dialogue stupid, the story incomprehensibly boring. And it was a prequel, so you have none of the character development from the film to anchor it. And in the end, it was just terrible. I hated it then, I still hate it now, never again. I refuse. And so I think that clears up why I was feeling very apprehensive about this Halloween special. I was really worried about the same things tripping it up, and having that 25 minutes long outstay its welcome. So the other day I sat down to watch it, and in the end, I was pleasantly surprised. It wasn't god-awful, it wasn't terrible. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it was really all that good. It is very much the definition of mid. Average, to an absurd degree, but it's very watchable at the same time, which shows that since they've released their truly awful holiday special, DreamWorks Animated Television have lifted their game, if only slightly. But I suppose we need to go into some details, right? Whenever you approach an animated work, you're really looking at three major things. You want to talk about the visuals, the soundscape, and the narrative. For the general audience member, that's all you're going to care about. While in terms of the animation quality, which is one of the elements that was rather bad, especially coming off the original film, I felt like this was a step up from what we've seen previously. It was nothing spectacular, but it was no longer noticeably bad, which was something. Like I said, it was very middle of the road. You have to go into it with low expectations for the production quality. The action is not going to be comparable to the movie. With all that in mind, it's not distractingly bad or anything like that. It's not ugly or low enough quality that you can't believe a major studio was involved in its production. It's just sort of there. It's mid, like I said. It's not close to the film, but as we mentioned earlier, that's by design. It doesn't have the budget to make that sort of visual work, so you have to make do. The designs are fine, the animation's not janky, it's nice and fluid, the world design and action is obviously pared back, but what are you gonna do? They made this on the cheap as a Netflix cash grab after all, I can respect that. Next up, we should talk the audio side of things, specifically looking at the voice acting quality, because realistically we don't care about the music in this, at least I didn't. I remember thinking that the voice acting we got in the Christmas special was pretty bad overall. I don't necessarily think the actors themselves sucked or anything of the sort, that's not fair to say. But at the same time, you come into these sorts of things with the expectation of the character sounding a certain way. Their voice, their intonation, their cadence, all of these tiny little things that are very specific to the actor, that informs so much of the character that you see on screen. So when you change that up, when you swap in somebody else's voice, somebody else's rhythm, it doesn't always work. In fact, it rarely works unless you have somebody that A, has a very generic voice that is easily copied, or B, a very deeply talented voice artist who can do a near perfect impersonation. Sadly, I don't think The Bad Guys Haunted Heist quite hits the mark in that way. It's not that the voices are bad or the acting's bad, it's just that it doesn't hold up to the original as much as you'd like. That being said, I do remember it feeling a lot more jarring when I watched the Christmas special. Here, it was a slight feeling, but then I moved past it and I could try to engage with what was going on. But previously, it sucked up all of my attention and stopped me being able to focus as easily. So I guess that either means that they improved or I was able to tolerate it more. Or maybe it's just because I haven't seen the film in maybe 2 years at this point. I think if I'd watched the film more recently, it would have felt just as jarring as it did last year when I watched the holiday special. Either way, it sits there, probably slightly worse than the animation quality, but still improved enough that it really does encapsulate the whole vibe of being overall average. So here we come to the story, the narrative elements. I think the best way to address that is to just simply go through the special scene by scene and see what we can find. The special begins in perhaps the most cliche way possible, a tried and tested narrative sequence that has stood the test of time amongst all horror specials of kids' cartoons, and that is the on a dark and spooky night, rain optional, thunder necessary, you're going around a circle with the lights off in your house with a flashlight in your face, telling spooky tales. But in keeping with the heist movie theme that the franchise has, the ghost story gets combined with a potential mark for them to steal from. By design, this is the most cliche-ridden expositional monologue of all time. The guy is called Reginald E. Scary. Dark and gloomy house, he lives alone, mega greedy, with a determination to always keep hold of his ill-gotten goods, even beyond the grave. So Wolf thinks it would be a great idea to try to steal from this person. But his friends are less than convinced. One, because this sounds like how you'd end up in a body bag in the basement of an deranged serial killer, but also because the others are convinced that this heist is all a bunch of BS that Wolf has cooked up to try to scare them, like he does every Halloween. And at a certain point, they just have to believe he's going to do it again. Also, side note before we go any further on this, once again, they've set this before the movie. I really want the bad guys to have stuff that's set after the film. So much of the character development and the reason that the audience cares about these characters has to do with the events of the movie. And so having a bunch of special prequels just doesn't quite hit the same for me. Imagine if they set all of the Shrek special episodes before the first film took place and it is just Shrek mad in his swamp alone. It's not quite as fun. Even though the characters are all largely there, they aren't the same as they are in the film. Prequels can be difficult like that. And so already I only had medium interest in the story. I gotta say though, some of the dialogue and the jokes, they're not really all that funny if I'm being perfectly honest. There are like 1 or 2 moments in the episode I genuinely laughed at and found hilarious. And the rest got a nose exhale at best from me. But rewatching it whilst I write this, I am laughing slightly more, but not at the spots that I expected to. And so I'm left wondering, is the idea that the jokes in the special are so bad that they're good, and that is by design? Or are some of these jokes literally just that bad, and I'm laughing at the goofiness of it all? Either way, I'm having a better time. Doesn't make the jokes any better, but I'm enjoying them more. Eventually, all the characters agree, and they roll up on the house. They bust in, and as they go along, it becomes clearer and clearer that something sus is going on, and that judging by the opening scene, it was all going to have been a setup by Wolf to give his friends a massive scare for Halloween. The outside gate opens on its own, Tarantula's voice specifically echoes whilst nobody else's does. There's a self-playing piano, Wolf's flashlight conveniently conks out, no one else's does, and then a clockwork suit of armor comes to life and attacks them. In this sequence we have another joke so bad that, well, it's just bad, but it did make me laugh anyway. When the suit of armor attacks Piranha, he pretty much just shits himself, in a largely literal sense. But yes, we return to Wolf being sus, as then he is the one who figures out that it's a clockwork suit of armor. Also, this clockwork suit of armor somehow is able to think and choose opponents specifically, like it can see, but even then it's only a bunch of gears. Makes no real sense, but oh well, it's a Halloween special. So they arrive at the inner sanctum of Scary, and here Piranha manages to make it 3 separate fart jokes within 6 minutes, as he idly quips that the only thing within his inner sanctum is of course farts. You know what? This actually made me laugh. It was very deeply stupid, and they're not even trying hard with these. My inner child giggles furiously at this goofiness. And so they grab the necklace, and here is where the betrayal happens. And it's well done in my eyes, because you expect that Wolf is going to spring the prank when he grabs the amulet. But nothing happens, and so you think it's safe, only for them to leave and for the prank to be pulled afterwards in the parking lot. And so in a way, I got fooled too, as I briefly thought before I noticed that Wolf was missing, oh shit, maybe there's gonna actually be a ghost in this. And here for me, around the halfway point, is where the story really starts to pick up, and where I think the episode comes into its own in terms of the story. It seems the writers know that most people, even little kids, know their tropes at least somewhat. And thus when Wolf hears the music from the mansion, I feel like everybody in the world knows that even though the episode's going to present the curse as being real, that it's actually going to be an elaborate Scooby-Doo style revenge plot by his friends to get back at him for scaring him. And so it begins when they wake him up from his nap and reveal Piranha's been kidnapped. Ooh! And then they all go there and it's spooky, they all become ghosts and Wolf is begging, and they all laugh as he got pranked. And that's all well and good, it would have been pretty basic, but here's where they subvert my expectations, and Wolf reveals, nope, I'm pranking you. And this, his explanation of how he discovered it, how he clings to the back of the mission board, oh, it's both clever, and this visual legit made me laugh quite hard, and I kind of like that for me, it didn't end how I expected it to end. I truly thought that Wolf was going to be humbled by his friends, but the episode simply doubles down and has him crush them once more, and I found that really fresh. It's genuinely funny. Yeah, they clearly beat him up at the end, but it changes nothing. They all took the L here, and so it ended up leaving me on a massive high, because it was an ending I didn't really see coming or expect at all. It didn't linger too long, and whilst the special overall wasn't hugely funny, it did have its moments, especially on a rewatch. But yes, that ending was good enough for me to drag it away from being below average into something somewhat decent overall. I think it's still largely meh at times, but it's much better than the Christmas special, that's for sure, and if they make any more, maybe they can get even better. You never know. And so, yeah, beyond that, nothing much else to say. And so I'll just remind you these have all been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of The Bad Guys Halloween Heist if you've seen it? Do you like it? Hate it? You agree with my thoughts? Anything you'd like to add? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.